Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and all else to this year's Halloween special. The tradition lives on. Tonight, I've gathered 5 chilling creepypastas from around the internet for you all to listen to on this very special holiday. As I have a busy schedule nowadays filled with balancing work, life, and full-time studies, there's going to be less visual editing this time around. See this as more of an auditory experience. Still, these stories shall remain as terrifying as ever. Links to each of them shall be in the description. Do check them out for yourselves as they are really good, and do give these talented authors some kind words for their excellent horror writing. Sit back and enjoy as we go through the top 5 creepypastas of 2025. Enjoy! Number 5. Hurricane Season by Certain Shadows. Everyone hated Grady. All these decades later, I can still clearly recall when he moved to our quiet little town early one year, and into a large house down the road from my own modest home. His parents had left him an enormous inheritance, and he took great pleasure in flaunting his wealth at every opportunity. But we didn't despise Grady because he was well off. We hated him because he was a pestilence that wreaked havoc throughout our once peaceful community, and there was nothing we could do about it. Grady believed his money meant he could do whatever he wanted without consequence, and he was right. He was a pampered and inept man, far too lazy to do anything for himself and nowhere near clever, yet highly proficient at ensuring the right people were paid off. When an elderly schoolteacher berated Grady for speeding past the playground and nearly running over a small boy, her house mysteriously burnt down. When a waitress at the local diner rebuked Grady's advances, her father was attacked by 2 masked men during his regular evening jog and suffered a brain injury. Even the police were in Grady's pocket. On the rare occasion when someone tried to report him, the case always managed to somehow get swept under the rug. And simply avoiding Grady wasn't enough. Sometimes he appeared to select his targets at random. Even innocuous, mundane actions could incur his terrible wrath. By the time hurricane season rolled around, the threat of dangerous weather wasn't the only thing the townsfolk were living in fear of. Then, one night, he drunkenly ran over my dog, and I really began to hate him. When news of an impending storm reached us, many opted to evacuate. I chose to stay behind, and so did Grady. I'm not sure why he didn't leave or make any sort of preparations beyond purchasing a portable generator. I suppose his ego made him feel invincible. The wind whipped through the trees, rain poured down, and the power predictably went out. After it was all over, I drove around to survey the damage. I returned to see Grady, lost without his creature comforts, attempting to set up his new generator. With almost everyone gone or preoccupied with the storm's fallout, it seemed Grady finally had to get his own hands dirty. He obviously had no clue what he was doing. An idea occurred to me. I made my way to his house. Days passed. Eventually, police knocked down Grady's door and discovered him dead in his bed, eyes closed in eternal sleep. In the next room sat his generator. The explanation was a tragic accident that happens every hurricane season: carbon monoxide poisoning. As I watched them carry the body bag out of Grady's house, I thought back to our last conversation. I'd be happy to help you set that up, Grady, but if you run it outside, someone's gonna steal it. The safest place to keep it is inside the house. Number 4. The Skeleton on the Porch by Austin Dr. Tommy Morgan did not have the best life. Coming from a broken home, the young 11-year-old only experienced the worst. His father would return home drunk like a skunk, and he would get into heated arguments with his wife over money and how, since he was the bread maker, he could do with his earnings what he saw fit. Tommy's mother would do chores around the house, her eyes red from sobbing. Tommy himself would receive whippings from his father for the slightest of offenses. It always came with the hollow assurance that it would build character. There were many things that the boy despised, his father being number 1 on his list. A day never went by in which he dreamed of getting revenge on him, but it was all but a fantasy. His father was big and stout. As far as Tommy was concerned, his father was an unconquerable Goliath to his David. Thoughts of running away crossed his mind, but he did not have the heart to abandon his mother to the brute. He thought that he would never be able to get rid of him. At least, until that day. One of the few joys Tommy had in life was Halloween. On that holiday, he could discard his miserable life and become anyone he wanted to be. The candy and decorations were also a plus for him. His father, despite everything else, would at the very least spruce the house up for All Hallows Eve, with a spider made of old rags here and a papier-mâché ghost there. On a particular day, he brought home a skeleton. The skeleton was roughly his size, being 6'5" in height. It was dry with some visible cracks around the ribs and spine. It was missing a few upper teeth in the back, likely from years of wear and tear. Its hollow eye sockets were jet black and devoid of life. The bones, yellow with age, made a slight thump sound against the wall anytime Tommy's dad would swing the ancient artifact back and forth. It looked absolutely fragile in his colossal hands. He explained that he got the decoration from an old antique store, bragging about how much he swindled the store owner to get the skeleton cheap. He placed the skeleton in the bench on the porch and returned inside without much thought. Resuming his drinking, once more he got into a fight with Tommy's mother, this time over her wanting new curtains. Tommy left the house and sat on the bench with the skeleton. He vented his complaints to the decorative piece, not thinking much about whether he would be heard, but he nevertheless felt an ease talking to someone. From there on out, Tommy found himself loving the skeleton. Each day he would talk to it and would take care of it. Anytime leaves would fall on it, Tommy would blow them off with a leaf blower. When it rained, Tommy covered the skeleton with rags. For a second, he could have sworn that the skeleton was receptive to his acts of kindness. During one instance when he was gently wiping the skeleton's arm, Tommy heard whistling. From the direction he was looking, it appeared that its teeth were clattering. However, Tommy chalked it up to the wind blowing through the skeleton's mouth. Beyond his days spent with the Halloween decoration, Tommy's life continued as normal. His parents would argue over the tiniest of offenses, and his mother would resume doing chores around the house with tear-streaked eyes. Tommy would continue to receive beatings that his father thinly veiled as discipline. During dinner, Tommy accidentally dropped a glass, causing it to fall on the floor and break into a million pieces. As his father was beating him, there was a sudden thumping coming from the porch. Alarmed, the three paused to listen to the sudden noise. Whatever was out there paced back and forth on the porch, stomping as hard as its foot would allow. With bated breath, Tommy's father approached the door, opened it, only to see the skeleton in its sitting position. Once more, it was attributed to the culprit being the wind. For the next few days, the thumping would continue. The repetition ate away at Tommy's father, spurring him to leave home and remain out for longer hours. In his dreams, he was tormented by the skeleton. He would find himself in bed, alone. The skeleton appears at the foot of his bed, and it slides over his body, just coming short of his neck. His dad would wake up with a jolt and refuse to sleep the rest of the night. However, Tommy's dreams were starkly different. He would receive sweets and other confections, and his father would be far away. The skeleton would stand by, looking at him in the distance. Eventually, Tommy's dad couldn't take it anymore, and during a stormy night, he gathered the skeleton and tossed it in the back of his truck with little hesitation. Poor Tommy was awakened from his deep slumber, only to see the skeleton that he cherished being driven away. He ran to the door, but the truck bolted to life and bucked its way off the driveway. Heartbroken, Tommy returned to his bedroom and cried himself to sleep. The next day, his father returned, and so did the skeleton. Surprised at first, Tommy was grateful that his friend was back. Even more bizarre, his father was kinder. When Tommy accidentally broke a plate, instead of the whipping he was anticipating, he was instead given a stern but fair warning about how he could have hurt himself. There were no more arguments over money, which meant that his mother was now at peace. Their marriage also improved, and the two seemed more in love with each other in all the years of their life. However, Tommy couldn't help but notice that his father was acting weird. He moved around as if he were a stranger in his own skin. His legs would wobble, and knees buckled from the smallest of movements. Sometimes the skin around his face would slide, forcing him to push it back up with his spare hand. His jaw would hang agape as he ate, which translated to shoving food into his mouth at the back of his throat. Tommy learned the truth on Halloween. When he stared at the skeleton on the bench, there were no cracks on the ribs. In fact, instead of being ancient, the skeleton appeared to be fresh and, dare say, even more lifelike than before. It even had a full set of teeth. Shocked, Tommy turned to look at his father, who stared at him for what seemed like an eternity, before giving a wink. Number 3. Paint the Town Dead by Hezi 1. Growing up in England during the 70s and 80s was all damp and dreary. The kind of childhood where in your spare time, the only thing you could do was go outside with your friends or watch paint dry. I lived in a small industrial town in the north, known for the many mine shafts that came about around the early 19th century. What was once such a proud town, full of opportunity and pride, was now just a shell of something great. Poverty struck after the Industrial Revolution died down, and many workers followed the jobs in other areas across the country. Only a few remained. When I was 3, my dad died from a stroke. He too planned to leave town in search of something better, but that never happened, of course. My father and I share the same name, Peter. I wish I could have met him. My mom says that he was a great man, and he was now in a better place. I still hope, even now, that's true. I had a few friends in town. Most I met at school, and that would be where the extent of our relationship would be. We would hang out at school, play some football at the local green, and that would be it. But Simon was different. We would go on bike rides together through the dilapidated streets and go over to each other's houses. I especially liked going around to his house because he had a television. My mom wasn't keen on a TV, not just because of the price tag, but she had a firm belief that it was Lucifer's creation and we are being brainwashed. Understandably, I thought she was out of her head. Ever since Dad died, or at least for as long as I can remember, she has been a devout Christian. There were crosses all over our house, kinda like those weird rituals that summon spirits. I remember the day I biked home with Simon when he told me something I'll never forget. "Have you driven down that road behind your house?" he asked. There was never a road behind my house. Well, I thought there wasn't. It was just regular countryside hills and grass beyond that. "What are you on about?" "You know, the one with all those painted doors and windows?" I genuinely had no clue what he was talking about. All the houses in our town were actual real houses that could be lived in. Of course, most were left uninhabited after the workers left, but none has painted doors. Confidently I said, "Go on then, let's see these painted houses then." We made the short journey to my house, except we didn't take the turn into my street and kept going. After a few meters, we turned into a short strip of road with around 6 houses, 3 on each side. Behind the right side of houses was the countryside and thick forest area I spoke about earlier. The houses were thin and narrow, with about 10 feet of space between each one. Compare that to the tight layout of every other house, which, if you're lucky, have about a foot or two. Simon walked over to the first house on our left and signaled for me to follow. I did. From a distance, the house seemed normal, but up close is when the anomalies began to show. Simon started brushing his hand against the door, showing me that it was flat and not real. In disbelief, I inched closer, touching it for myself. He was right. "Have you ever been able to go inside?" My curiosity only grew more for the near half a minute it took for Simon to respond. "No." Simon still stared into the painted door. It seemed like he was looking for something, but there was nothing to look for. The other 5 houses followed the same formula, with the same painted door, varying colors, and 2 windows on either side, again painted. The windows had a black outline for the frame and a cyan from the inside. "You know, Peter, I have an idea." He paused for a moment. "We could turn this into some sort of secret hideout." Despite how creepy this old place was, that would be cool. "How about we look for an opening?" I suggested. We split up, with Simon taking the left and I took the right. The sides and back of the house were a blank of color, apart from the color of the brick. This whole street seemed so dystopian to me. I mean, it didn't seem dystopian. It was. We searched every corner of every house, looking for an opening or signs of damage to try and get in. And we found it. Simon's voice echoed over to me. "Peter, here!" I darted over in the direction of the shouts, towards the middle house on the left side. At the back of the house is where Simon stood, examining a small hole in the house. With enough squeezing, we definitely could fit in. Simon went head first. I pushed his shoes as he slid in carefully. I followed. Looking up, the building was hollow. On the ground was debris. Wooden slats, concrete, it was all there. The house stank of tar and smoke from cigarettes. It was darker inside than I expected. The painted windows from outside didn't let in any light, of course, so the only glow came from a crack in the boarded ceiling above and a faint slit to the entrance we'd squeezed through. My eyes adjusted slowly, but my nose was having a tougher time. The air felt thick, like it had been sitting still for years, marinating in dust and the ghosts of past lives. Simon stepped carefully, avoiding the jagged pieces of wood and shattered glass that littered the floor. "Looks like someone has been here before," he said, nodding to a half-burnt mattress in the corner. There was a tattered blanket over it, and something that looked like a pile of old cans and wrappers nearby. Probably some homeless man," I muttered, kicking aside an empty bottle. Simon shrugged, clearly less bothered by the idea than I was. "Maybe, but they're not here now." He said it like that meant we were safe. The weirdest part was the silence. Outside, even in our small town, you'd always hear something. A dog barking, cars in the distance, birdsong maybe. But inside the house, it was like sound didn't work properly. Like the air swallowed it whole. We spent about 20 minutes looking around, poking at the half-collapsed furniture and trying to guess what each room might have been. Bedroom, living room, maybe even a kitchen in the back if you squinted hard enough. Everything was stripped though. It was like someone had taken a real home, scooped the life out of it, then sealed it back up with paint. Simon suddenly stopped near a boarded doorway that looked like it once led upstairs. "You hear that?" I froze. No, I didn't hear anything. That is what terrified me. He pressed his ear to the wood, and I joined him. And then, just faintly, came the sound. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing above us. "There's no upstairs, right?" I whispered. "You saw it. This place is hollow." Simon didn't say anything. He just stared up at the ceiling, eyes wide. Then, another sound. This time, not from above. It came from behind us. A quiet, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. We spun around. Nothing. Just that rotted mattress and a broken chair. But we both heard it. Maybe we should come back tomorrow," Simon said, suddenly paled. I nodded, too scared to argue. We backed out the way we came, pushing each other through the small hole, hearts pounding. Out of nowhere, just as we turned around, an audible cough came from the far corner of the house. There was a big pile of furniture and wood stacked up. Enough for someone to hide behind. We raced back towards the exit. Simon escaped first and tried to pull me out. I was stuck. Somehow, the gap felt smaller. It fit Simon perfectly, but I was stuck. Then, very faintly, I could hear footsteps. These footsteps gradually grew in pace over the course of a couple seconds, until it became a run. "Come on, Simon!" My foot suddenly kicked something. It was soft, like cloth or skin. I didn't dare to look back, though. My clothes began to rip against the brick. I didn't care anymore. With force, I suddenly flew out of the gap, just grazing the fence that separated the back of the house to my street. My fight-or-flight senses kicked in, and I ran towards my bike and pedaled as fast as I could, with Simon following closely behind. That night, I stared at the crucifix that hung on my bedroom wall. I couldn't take my eyes off it. For once, it brought me comfort. I was protected from whoever that thing was. It was fast, almost not human-like. Simon and I never discussed what happened that day, and we never returned. As we grew older, we grew further apart and went our separate ways. I hope he's doing well now. As for myself, I moved away. I have a great family, a good job, and I'm doing well for myself. But every once in a while, when I'm alone, I still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Number 2. The Flick by Rainmaker Windwaker. I don't know what's happening to me. It started a few days ago. I was on the bus and out of the corner of my eye, I could see the person a few seats across from me, and it looked like they were staring at me. I couldn't tell for sure because they were just barely within the edge of my periphery. I thought maybe they were looking at something else. Looking past me, out the window or something. It could have been anything. But I subtly turned my head towards them and they weren't looking at me. They had their head down looking at their phone. I figured I mistook my peripheral vision. Again, they just looked like a vague blob of color from where I could see, and they were blonde, so maybe I mistook the hue of their skin for the hue of their hair. Things like that happen, I guess. I forgot about it. Then, it happened again the next day. Different person, different seat. I could see them staring at me from the very edge of my vision. This time, I was almost certain. They had long dark hair, and I could see that darkness on either side of the face shaped, light skin colored, fuzzy blob. Vague dark points within that shape denoting eyes, nose, and mouth. They were looking at me. This time I turned my head fast to meet their gaze, but again, their head was down, and they were on their phone. Their dark hair coming down and covering the side of their face. I couldn't have mistaken it this time. I was kind of freaked out by this point, but I chose to believe my eyes were playing tricks on me again. It was a long few days. I was in my head. Fine. Then, it happened again. This time in a restaurant. I could see them sitting in a booth parallel to my table. They were further away, so I couldn't make out specific details, but I could see that their body was facing forward and their head was turned and facing me. I decided not to turn my head, just to turn my eyes towards them really fast. It was the quickest way to get even a portion of my focused vision on them. So I did, and then I saw it. The flick. And that's what I call it. For a split second, less than a split second, I saw them looking at me, but my brain didn't have enough time to process the image before they flicked to looking at the menu. I say flicked because it was too fast, too sudden, like a glitch. A single frame of animation out of place. I don't know if I would have even noticed it if I wasn't looking for it. The fourth time, it was a woman in the elevator of my building. I knew her. Her name was Darcy. We had conversations before, but here she was, staring at me out of the corner of my eye. Every floor, all the way up. When we got to our floor, I turned my eyes really fast and saw the flick again. It was impossible. If her head really turned that fast, then her hair should have moved. I should see it bouncing, whooshing, then falling into place. Instead, it sat comfortably like it had always been there. She looked at me looking at her, and she smiled. Like nothing happened. I started seeing them more and more. It began happening multiple times a day. I was so scared and so paranoid. I wanted it to stop, but I also had to see the flick again. I had to see what they looked like when they were looking at me. Sometimes I could see it, if I was fast enough, but I could never fully process the image. It was never there for long enough. I could never fully see them. My brain would try interpolating what they should look like, but for some reason, it never matched. I had a feeling, just a feeling, that the faces that were looking at me weren't these people's actual faces. I tried to trick it, using reflections to see, but they still flicked away. I tried to take video, but it was the same. By the time the recording started, they had already flicked away. The red-headed man with the beard was the worst. I saw him staring from down the sidewalk. When I turned to face him, his entire body was facing away from me. His head spun back into place in a fraction of a second. I don't know what they are. I don't know why this is happening to me. I think I noticed something I wasn't supposed to notice. I think they always watch us, using the eyes of others. We are just not supposed to catch them looking. I caught them looking, and now I see them everywhere. Everyone stares at me all the time. I thought isolation was the answer, but then I caught the reflection in my mirror staring too. I'm never alone. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know what they want. If you think someone might be staring at you out of the corner of your eye, don't look. Please, don't look. Number 1. My Coworker Was Indestructible by Tapeworm Reverie. Until very recently, I worked for a company that manufactures parts for large medical equipment. For my own anonymity, I'm going to keep the details vague. All you really need to know is that I worked with big chunks of metal in a relatively small factory in the middle of nowhere. I've been in the metalworking field for quite a while at this point, and I've seen my fair share of industrial accidents over the years. I've long since come to terms with the fact that an occasional gnarly gash or painful abrasion is par for the course in my line of work. In fact, almost all of my coworkers at that factory had endured some kind of minor injury in their career. All except for one. One of my former coworkers was this guy called Lawrence. He was a loner, mid-30s, and quiet to the point of being antisocial. Although he didn't really engage with us other guys, he was pleasant enough. Never rude or anything like that, but not particularly friendly either. People still tried to joke around with him all the time, though mainly about the fact that he seemed to never get hurt, or even react to things that should be painful. It became a running joke of sorts that he was indestructible. I think people were trying to encourage him to socialize, but it ended up annoying him more than anything else. Generally, he tolerated the joke with a wry sort of grace. There was clearly some amount of truth to the joke, though. Lawrence would regularly touch burning hot metal or chemical irritants without so much as a flinch. It was impressive what he could endure, albeit concerning. The running gag was only reinforced when, about a year ago, Lawrence had an incident with a milling machine. He was using the thing as he usually did, with no personal protective equipment whatsoever. I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but a thin hunk of metal about the size, thickness, and shape of a tortilla chip flew from the metal sheet he was cutting and made its way directly into his eye. He didn't yell in pain, nor was there any blood. He didn't even seem concerned or freaked out about his apparent eye trauma. It turned out that he was completely fine, not even a scratch. Apparently, the shard had wedged itself perfectly between his eyeball and tear duct, miraculously avoiding cutting either his eye or face. In light of recent events, however, I'm not so sure that explanation is entirely accurate. In the following months, Lawrence became more and more careless with his work. Not that he was doing a bad job per se, the issue was that he was entirely ignoring safety guidelines. Evidently, he was always a little more lax when it came to that sort of thing, and he seemed to lack the self-preservation instincts that most people have. We would consistently remind him of the safety precautions, but he never really listened, claiming that it was easier to do the job without protective equipment. He was doing good work, so the higher-ups didn't really care if he broke a few guidelines, and nobody wanted to press the issue with him. I sincerely regret not making more of an attempt to intervene. I still struggle to wrap my head around what exactly happened to Lawrence last week. The thing that I witnessed don't sound possible, even to myself, but I'll do my best to articulate the events of my last day working for the company. For the first 3/4 of my workday, absolutely nothing was amiss or even mildly out of the ordinary. It was a Wednesday. The project I was working on was unremarkable. I was on a bit of a time crunch due to some external factors going on in my life, which I won't get into here, so I decided to work late so I could finish up what I was doing ahead of schedule and have a bit more free time later. Lawrence apparently also decided to work late, which wasn't surprising, as he did so somewhat often. As one might surmise based on his description, he wasn't really the type of guy to go out for some drinks with the boys. Instead of socializing, Lawrence was working a lathe. I assume the majority of people reading this aren't very familiar with the types of machines used for large-scale metalworking, so allow me to give a highly condensed version of what exactly we're dealing with. A metal lathe is sort of like a potter's wheel for metal, a turning machine that we use to cut, sand, and face metal. They allow us to cut metal extremely efficiently and symmetrically. And Lawrence stuck his hand in one. I have no idea why exactly he did so. I can only assume it was a careless mistake. The second his hand connected with the spinning rod of metal, he yelped in shock. Lawrence and I were the only two on that side of the factory floor, and I guess that means I was the only one beside him who saw the initial impact. I braced myself to be splattered with chunks of gore, as my coworker was obliterated by an industrial machine. But the rain of blood, guts, and brain matter I was expecting never came. For an infinitesimally tiny fraction of a second, I thought maybe nothing had happened at all. But then, I looked back up, and my ephemeral relief was replaced by horror and confusion. There was no blood, no screaming. Lawrence only looked confused. His arm was caught around the metal rod he was cutting, but instead of being violently ripped from his body or sucking him into the machine, it was stretching. It seemed like he was made of clay, until I heard the stomach-churning pop sound of his shoulder being pulled from its socket as he stumbled forward. His arm had wrapped around the rod dozens and dozens of times, looking like a coiled spring. He had a look of panic on his face. I assume he must have been frozen in shock, but he finally started to scream. In what felt like 20 minutes, but really was only half a second, his arm seemed to run out of slack, and his body was pulled into the lathe. At least, his upper half was. His legs stood in place as his torso stretched at its midsection, joining his arm in the spring-like coil. His screaming faded after a few rotations, giving way to a gurgling, retching sound. A small amount of vomit leaked from his mouth, little droplets of it landing on the floor and the walls as his upper body spun in place. At this point, I finally came to my senses and rushed to try to turn the thing off. I didn't actually have to do anything, however, because by the time my initial shock had subsided, the backed-up folds of Lawrence's skin and flesh had jammed the machine. I had no idea what to do from here. In my dazed state, I hadn't noticed the guys who were working on the other side of the factory floor had gathered around. Everyone had this look in their eyes like I'd never seen. This horrified, confused, glazed-over look only present when one witnesses something beyond comprehension. I called the police, not able to fully explain what I had just seen. I was probably babbling incoherently. The police arrived. They called who I assume was the FBI. The FBI guys called someone else. Soon enough, Lawrence's body was being unwound from the piece of steel by government officials and carried away. I thought he was dead. He was making a sound. I thought it was agonal breathing or some sort of death rattle, but when I saw his face, I knew he was trying to speak. He was fully conscious. The image of his eyes as they made contact with mine will be laser cut into my retinas forever. Needless to say, I quit my job. There we have it. Those were the 5 stories that I've gathered for you all on this Halloween night. Once again, I thank you so much for sticking with me until the end of the video, and thank you so much for still checking out my videos from time to time. It truly does mean so much to me after all this time. Your support really is appreciated. Have an incredible Halloween, each and every one of you. Enjoy it while it lasts, before every store in the country exchanges their Halloween decorations for Christmas ones. Have you noticed that some stores have even begun selling Christmas stuff already, even before Halloween is even over? Madness. Madness, I tell ya. Anyways, thanks for watching, everyone. Stay awesome. Goodbye.
Whoa. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.